You're listening to episode 5 of the Emerging Leader podcast. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Honestly, I am a bit surprised at how many people have actually been watching this in video on YouTube, so that's pretty cool. I feel like I'm like net 7+7 subscribers since starting the YouTube or I guess updating the YouTube. So that's cool. But apologies that this is not a video episode. A whole bunch of things are happening in life at the moment, and I'm excited to share more about those when the time is right. But until then, you just get me in my pajamas here for an audio episode instead. So today's episode is all about the number one non-technical skill that completely transformed my career. And I'll get into what that actually is. But the reason this is so important is because it's not a technical skill. It's something that any young professional can actually apply to their career or what they're facing in their work, whether that is a technical problem that they're facing in engineering or some other technical development skill. It could be marketing. It could be honestly anything. I feel like this is such a great skill to have, not just for work, but in life. And this is absolutely something that when I've applied it, it has transformed my career. I've shot up beyond this. It's helped get my work noticed as well and has helped people listen to me and has helped me, I guess, influence people in that as well. So generally speaking, it's been huge. And this skill, drum roll, is called radical problem solving. And I'll get into exactly what that is, some examples of where I've used that in my own career, and much more. So thank you so much for joining me for this episode. Apologies that it's only audio, but I'm super glad you're here. Really glad that you're tuning in and joining me for this. Thank you so much for the positive response so far on the podcast. That has been really, really amazing and warms my heart to see all of your messages and well wishes. So really appreciate it. Stay tuned for this week's episode. The Emerging Leader Podcast. All right, so the non-technical skill that completely transformed my career. So previously, I used to call this solution-based thinking, but now I'm calling it radical problem solving. One, because it sounds cooler. And two, it's more about just thinking about a solution. So solution-based thinking, I don't think fully gets it. So I want you to think about the last time you approached a challenge at work. Whether that was a new task that you were given, a bit of a process improvement, or you just got into a new job. This is like something so great, especially if you're in a new role or new job or new area of something. I just want you to think about the last time that you were faced with something like this. Did you, A, try and make a small improvement to inch yourself forward, or B, zoom out to look at the bigger picture and imagine the ideal outcome and work backwards from here? So this is not a new concept. It's not groundbreaking, but I feel like it's not talked about enough. So in almost all of my jobs, I've tried to avoid option A of just making small improvements and instead have been focusing on radical problem solving. And there are a few reasons for this. So one, I feel that often people making small improvements don't often zoom out to make sure that the small improvements are actually happening in the right direction. And I'll talk a bit more about that as well. But also, I feel like these small improvements are meant to have these big impacts, and naturally they don't, whereas actually you'd be better off looking at the bigger picture of things, working backwards and ending up even halfway, and you'll still be so much better off. Plus, it allows you to gain really, really amazing context for the situation and think about things that are out of the box and also challenge yourself to gain new skills. So my personal example of this is when I first joined Infrabuild. I remember very vividly on my first day, I joined on this 3-month contract. If you've listened to the first episode of the podcast where I talk about my journey coming to Australia. So I was a 3-month contract. It was basically an operations analyst, or I can't remember what they called it, but I was doing a lot of analytics and automation. So they gave me a stack of these paper production sheets where each of the employees was filling out line by line which jobs they had completed, what heat numbers they had done, how much machine downtime they had on which machine. So they hand me a stack of these papers And they basically say calculate labor hours per ton, which is this metric that we use in steel. I was just like, are you kidding me? I've just come from aerospace manufacturing where each of my staff had tablets and I could see real time what they were working on. I'm not going to sit here and punch this data into a spreadsheet. Most of it, I couldn't even read what the guys had written. No, I'm not going to do that. Also, I wanted to create a solution that was more sustainable for them because one, I wanted to be able to take holidays and not for them to have to rely on someone to input these sheets into Excel to be able to understand how their business was going. That just blew my mind. So obviously for me, I sat down at this point, and plus keep in mind that at this point, like I said, I had 3 months left in the country. I more or less had nothing to lose because I was just giving her at that point, as the Canadians say, had nothing to lose and was just trying to do something that was a bit crazy or work on the ideal solution and really just do something that would actually work. So I knew that the ideal solution would ultimately be an MES system, a manufacturing execution system that recorded how much had been produced, how long it had taken each person, with all of the attributes and the downtime rather than just a scanning event. So at the time we did have an MES, and it was honestly like a really great system that is also the same age as I am. So it was on our roadmap to update that with a different one, but not obviously at the time. So the MES at the time did give us a scanning event, but didn't give us all of the additional details. So that was the first ideal solution. And again, thinking about this, I'm like, how do I zoom out? How do I look at what is the true root cause of this problem and what is the solution that I can implement? So beyond obviously an MES replacement, which is a mammoth project, the second most ideal solution was a homemade app. Now, I had never made an app before, but again, like I said, I was just in a phase of let's just try everything and just try and teach myself. And if I stay in the country, great. If I don't, then whatever, I've got nothing to lose. So I'd absolutely never made an app before. And I remembered people talking about access forms and databases. So I was like, okay, well, I know that I more or less need a form for these guys to fill out that has all of their jobs and downtime and all of these things. So let me just build this in Access. So I'd heard of people doing this and I was like, okay, surely I can just watch some YouTube videos and figure this out. So over the next kind of day or so, I mapped out the app design and key features on this huge roll of butcher's paper that I got from IKEA. And I did this through talking to the production supervisors, the operations managers, people on the shop floor, and basically said, okay, how do we replicate this form, one, but also what else would you like in this form if you could digitize it? Honestly, a lot of the answers were people saying, oh, I don't know, we've never done that. So a lot of it was left up to me. But on the butcher's paper, and I covered my office at the Noble Park office I was working at. I covered my office in this paper. I have photos of it. And it was broken up into phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 features. And depending on the color of the marker that I was using on the paper meant what I thought I could confidently develop and stuff that I had absolutely no idea how I was going to make it happen, but I knew it was a feature that we would want in the actual application. So 2 days later, I'm absolutely getting nowhere with the access form, nowhere. It's hopeless, it's janky, it's really hard to develop in, and I just kind of gave up on that. But that weekend, I was actually registered to attend the Microsoft Power Platform event in Melbourne to chat with just some other people. And obviously I love Power Platform from an analytics perspective. So wanted to just go and chat to people. And I remember being there and I'm sitting at this table with all of these other developers and I just was explaining my problem to them. And one of the guys says, why don't you use Power Apps? And I was like, oh, I don't even know what that is. And so I had never heard of Power Apps. But over the next just over a week, I basically spent all of my evenings and during the day YouTubing about Power Apps, trying to build this application to get that first iteration ready to go to production and to use on the shop floor. So the first version was launched 9 days after this event. Now, granted, also in this, there's a lot of chaos of me probably bypassing like protocols around, IT and checking with the right people. But sometimes you just have to do what you know is right anyways. And I'll talk more about that as well. So after that first version was actually launched, I spent almost all of my time on the shop floor working with the operators, who are the users in this case, to fix a whole bunch of things that actually made it easier for them to use the application, such as autofill, being able to go back into the app and update any records or fix mistakes, recording machine downtime, recording scrap, heat traceability, etc. And I also worked with the management team as well on the other side of the fence to build automated reports with Power BI so they could see the live data from the shop floor instead of having to wait for someone to enter these paper sheets into Excel. So this was, as far as I know, the first app of its kind in the reinforcing businesses and possibly the other businesses. And it was in use for multiple years until we replaced our MES with one that had improved shop floor recording. But even still to this day, almost 5 years later, this app is still in use in a number of machines that weren't covered by our MES upgrade. And some of our other states use other apps that I built during this time as well. So it was just a really transformative time. And to be able to deliver these, I guess, insights and data directly through the application. Plus, selfishly, I didn't have to type these things into a freaking Excel sheet anymore, was huge. And this work got me noticed by regional management, by general management about these sorts of things that I was doing, and definitely helped propel my career. So the point being in this is that if I hadn't zoomed out, if I was just like, oh man, like, maybe I can scan them. Maybe I can, I don't know, maybe I can just improve the spreadsheet, or maybe I can just get really quick on the spreadsheet or make really small incremental improvements. I never would have challenged myself to make the app or to learn on YouTube or to do that, which wouldn't have had my work noticed by all of the people who were the key influencers in getting me sponsored to actually stay in the country. Which at that point, that was not my intention, but this is just how I look at things and how I tend to work. And this is absolutely how I approach problems at the moment. We're currently working on a whole bunch of system updates and things, and we're typically so focused on how do we sort out these spot fires, right? How do we just fix these small little pieces? But also it's really hard to get people to buy into those small pieces unless you can help them zoom out and actually take a holistic approach. So I guess the main point of this episode is, okay, great, that's a sweet story, Ashley, but how do you actually do this and how do you apply this in your life? So like I said, you have to zoom out, you have to take a holistic approach. Instead of focusing on small fixes, how can you actually look at the entire system or process landscape to identify the changes that will make a bigger impact? Now, this does not mean that you take on this mammoth thing or not stay agile, right? So some people, when they get zoomed out, they get sent into this kind of tailspin because things just become too big for them. So you need to make sure that you continue to break things up into smaller pieces and iteratively release features or make improvements. So like the app, I was iterating on that app for well over a year into the future while it was in production use. But definitely stay agile with it, but make sure that you zoom out to really, as Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind that you're actually trying to achieve. And I know this episode probably sounds so simple. Of course, let's take in the bigger picture. But when you're actually in the role, and I'm sure you can think about people that you work with that do this, where they just try and fix small things or spot fires, and they're actually missing the whole point. And those spot fires might actually not be fixing any of the problems or the biggest issue. So another piece of advice on this is to get others involved and to not be a lone wolf. So the only thing worse than making small and sometimes the wrong improvements is making improvements that don't actually fix anything because you haven't spoken to anyone about it. So get in there and try and understand what is the root cause of the issue that you're facing. What is really happening here? What's the main issue? So in the application, the guys on the shop floor, honestly, writing in the sheet was easier than the computer, but they understood that it would be better data for them or like better data for the company if they were doing it from a computer, quicker turnaround on issues or downtime and that sort of thing that they could also raise throughout the app. And obviously the huge user value was one for me, not having to enter these sheets, but also for management to have real-time recording of what's actually happening on the shop floor. So get involved and speak to people about this. So obviously in software development, they call this user research, but ultimately it's such a great way also to build rapport and build relationships with colleagues and make sure you're focused on the thing that will actually make the most difference. So when I worked with these guys on the shop floor to build the application, we honestly built a fantastic relationship just because of the time that I was spending with them. And anytime I go and visit Noble Park, like I see these guys and we catch up and they still know me really well. So it's a really important way to build these relationships too, and try and understand the bigger picture of what's actually happening in the business as well. Because also a great way to get promoted into different departments or different roles is to have a general understanding of what's happening in that role or department, how it impacts your department. And also managers just love people that can see things holistically outside of just their stream of work, which definitely as a manager myself, I really admire that. So the biggest piece of advice here, and the biggest probably takeaway, is that you have to be ambitious with what you set yourself up to do. You have to trust yourself. So people say don't overpromise and underdeliver, which I used to disagree with. I used to say you should just overpromise and just deliver on that promise, which is that's a bit harsh. So I do agree, like you don't want to underdeliver, but also you can't underpromise on a solution to stay safe. You need to challenge yourself and bet on yourself and trust your ability to learn as you go and come up with a solution that actually makes a difference. Don't just do the small thing or the thing that you for sure know that you can do. Like on the butcher's paper where I wrote out all of the different things I could develop. And granted, I didn't even know how to develop an app, but I knew that I probably could develop phase one and then a whole bunch of other stuff that I knew needed to happen for the user value, but I didn't know how to do it. And that's what people often miss in the problem solving side of things, is that they just do what they know, even if they miss the mark on the actual user value. So you need to be delivering user value first, even if it's a hard thing. And also stay committed to the long-term success of it. So, focus on creating sustainable and lasting solutions. Like the application that was not like it was a quick initial iteration, so quite agile in getting out that first version, but then we kept building on it, kept improving on it, and it was in place until it needed to be replaced in 3 years or whenever it was, and it's still in place on a couple of machines and will outlive me, so I think you have to be committed to that long-term success, and it's not just a box ticking exercise. It's not going to be overnight. And then finally, and this is one of my favorite things that I've been saying lately, beyond what you guys have heard on the other episodes of everything you want is on the other side of a hard conversation. Similar vein, actually. You have to do the right thing, even if it's the hard thing. And I feel like this is, it's a bit generic to just apply it to problem solving. This should apply to everything in your life. But doing the right thing, even if it's a hard thing, will make you stand out. Because to be able to look at a problem and say, okay, the easy thing to do is this little spot fix over here. It's this little, thing over here. But to actually have the ability to zoom out and say, okay, what are the inputs and outputs of this issue? What is actually going to fix this and how do we break that up incrementally? How do I get the right people involved in this? How do I influence them to come together on a solution? That's hard. That's not easy. That doesn't mean you can do it, from your pajamas on Teams necessarily. I'm sure you can. But it means that you have to do the hard thing, and it's going to take a bit longer, but it will be the right thing to do. And also it will help your work get noticed. It will help other people recognize that you have that skill to look holistically at how these things are actually working and the end-to-end process. So if you take one thing away from this, it's zoom out and do the right thing, even if it's the hard thing. So I know this has been a bit of a rapid fire episode strictly on audio. So I hope that's not too annoying, although I know a lot of you just strictly listen to audio anyway. So great, no change for you. But I would just really encourage you to look at the next challenge in your life with this in mind, whether that is a new task at work or problem solving or process improvement. Ask yourself, is this just a small improvement on the path to the bigger goal, which is what you want when you zoom out and then break it up into small pieces? Or is this just a small thing that I'm doing to respond to a fire? Is this small improvement even in the right direction? And if you immediately say it's in the right direction without zooming out, I would also challenge you, because I would, look at the examples of small improvements that you've put in place previously, and are they still in place? Because that's also a great litmus test for whether they were the right thing. It's something I see a lot of is people say, oh, well, I've already fixed that, or I've already implemented a system for that, or we have a system for that. And it's people don't stop using things if they work. They only stop using them if they don't, or if they actually hinder or add to the real issue. So I would use that as a bit of a litmus test as well. So focus on the right thing, focus on the bigger thing, and work backwards from there. So hopefully this episode has been like a really tactical tip that you can use in any industry that you're in. Absolutely, this is something that will help you stand out. This is something that I look for in my team as well. How do we zoom out? How do we look at the bigger picture of this and make sure that we're working on the right thing? What will make the most difference versus just spot fixing different things? We need to look holistically, not just at our department as well as an engineering team, but what are the inputs and outputs that we have, but also how do we interact with other teams? Because if we're spot fixing something, that could be causing a world of chaos down the track. And I can tell you right now, this is absolutely what management looks for in people. They want them to be able to look holistically. And if I hadn't built that app, it probably would mean that, ultimately, I probably wouldn't even be in Australia, because no one would have noticed my work if I was just continuing to type things into an Excel spreadsheet. So that being said, I hope you've enjoyed this short episode here for episode 5, but really appreciate you sticking with the podcast and recording. I've been reaching out to an amazing lineup of guests coming up over the next coming weeks. Everything from finance for young professionals to personal branding to networking to starting your own companies and everything in between. It's honestly such an incredible lineup. I feel like I interrupted Joe while he was working today, 100 times, telling him about these new people that have responded to my emails about coming on the podcast. And that's super exciting. So also, if you have any topics or suggestions or things that you would love to hear on the podcast, or even people as well that you'd love me to reach out to get on the podcast, I would absolutely love to hear that from you. So with that being said, I really appreciate you listening to this episode, and I will catch you on the next one. Hope you have an amazing week. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm recording today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that are listening to the podcast.